being mistreated or not appreciated the way that they should be appreciated, right? And when you're kind of witnessing those narrations from a third person point of view, it does end up getting to you after a while, because you're asking yourself, well, someone who's so beloved, number one, by Allah, and obviously number two, by us who are now people who sit here and say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how could anyone have ever mistreated a person like that? How could anyone have ever thought of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as anyone less than someone who just hoped for and wanted the best for every single person that was around him? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, inshaAllah ta'ala. So the first thing that we're going to bring up, inshaAllah, is the author here is saying that initially when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam began preaching and teaching Islam, okay, there were a few things that the Quraysh, the people around him, had a very big issue with, okay? And by the way, if anybody wants to understand like human psychology, I really implore you just to go and read about the Quraysh in Mecca before some of them began to accept Islam, okay? So when you think about any human vice, like any human challenge, nafsi, spiritually, you will find it within the Quraysh because they exhibited it, literally exhibited it in the early onset of the Prophet's message, okay? You talk about like insecurity. You talk about the idea of bully tactics. You talk about the idea of gossip and backbite. You talk about the idea of jealousy, of arrogance. All of those things came to the surface when you talk about the Quraysh of Mecca. So the author mentions three things. He says that when the Prophet ﷺ began teaching Islam to the community, the Quraysh essentially had three tenets that they had unanimous issues with. And we'll cover all three of them today, inshaAllah. Number one, the first issue that the Quraysh had with the Prophet ﷺ is that they had an issue with the fact that he kept talking about this idea of a day of judgment. They had an issue with that. Why? Because the day of judgment is quite literally a day, an idea that holds people accountable in their life. Like without a day of judgment, anyone can do whatever they wanted to without worrying about any level of accountability or being asked about why they did what they did any time in their life, right? So the Quraysh felt uncomfortable with that. And there's a very obvious sign of people who are uncomfortable with the idea of an afterlife. Anyone that's uncomfortable with the idea of an afterlife, it is bred from the fact that they have a hard time understanding the idea of ownership. I have to own up to what I do. I have to own up to everything that I say. I have to own up to the way that I behave. I have to own up to the decisions that I made. A person who understands that they tried their best to make good decisions and to say the right things and to treat the right people beautifully, then guess what? The idea of a day of judgment does not freak them out because they know, alhamdulillah, you know what? I'm going to meet Allah one day and I'm excited to meet Allah. I'm happy to meet Allah because I know that there are moments in my life where there were certain things that I did that weren't appreciated in the dunya, but Allah will allow me to understand the full circle of the reason of why I did what I did in the akhirah. Okay? But the Quraysh had a hard time understanding this because they knew that they used to abuse people. They knew that they used to assault people. They knew that they used to not really do justice to their responsibilities. And because of those tenets, they started to push away the idea of this day of judgment. Because the day of judgment is too scary to think about for a person who knows that they are guilty of doing terrible, terrible things. And so they began to oppose that. And so they used to say to the Prophet ﷺ, like, how is it possible that one day we're going to be resurrected after being turned to dust? How's that even possible? What are you talking about? You're crazy. They started kind of like sharing all these things with the people around them, right? And subhanAllah, I'll read an excerpt that I actually put on my Instagram story earlier today because I thought it was so moving. The author, he says here that the Quran asks us to imagine the case of an oppressor who dies without having been punished for the suffering he inflicted. In addition, what about the case of someone who dies having suffered unjustly at the hands of an oppressor? Alternatively, we may even consider the case of a virtuous person who dies without having been rewarded for his virtue, or an evil person who was never punished for his unjust deeds. What a powerful statement. The Quran is teaching us, subhanAllah, that literally, if you're a person who believes in the akhirah, you understand that there is an answer to every question that you have in your life. But you must believe in the afterlife. Because the absence of an acknowledgement of a hereafter, you're going to be upset and confused and angry for all the wrong reasons. Because the afterlife is what gives us some sort of reason to why terrible things happen in the dunya. The afterlife gives us a type of reason to why certain people who are so pure, who are so good, that if they don't get what they deserve in this life in measure of reward, there is something to look forward to in the next. I mean, how many people in here sitting right now have thought in their mind, like, I didn't deserve that, right? I was misunderstood. I wish that person only knew how much I cared about them. They would never say those things about me. Or I wish that person was held accountable for what they did that was so wrong, but why did they get away with it? A person who doesn't understand Yawm al-Akhirah, they will be so angry because they believe that every one of these questions, they don't have an answer. And all of those things just end at the time of their death. So a person, a'udhu billah, we never say this, but I'm trying to logically kind of reason here. So to a person who doesn't believe in an akhirah, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Fir'aun technically have the same end. A'udhu billah. We ask Allah to protect us from ever thinking like this. Everyone say Ameen. The fact that we know that the Prophet will achieve the highest of marks, the highest of levels, and Fir'aun will be punished by Allah or be given justice by Allah in whatever way that Allah deems fit, that gives the heart so much rest and solace. Because we know that Allah is Al-Hakim. He's Al-Adl. He's the most just. So Allah will take care of it. When you see the kids who suffered in Palestine and continue to suffer and have suffered for the past 80 years, the only thing that a helpless person from across the ocean, when they look at these videos and they look at these photos and they start asking themselves the questions as to why this is happening, one of the only ways that you can actually kind of console yourself is by telling yourself that I believe that Allah is Al-Adl. He is the most just. So although there are certain shayateen that are getting away with their crimes here, I know that Allah will give them ultimately what they deserve in the afterlife, and they will not be given anything less than that. And the children who were taken away from their families over the past few years, I know that those children will be playing and laughing and having a good time in Jannah. Why? Because we believe that's real. But the Quraysh weren't able to understand that. And that was the first thing that they had a problem with. And then the second thing that the Quraysh began to kind of pick at of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is going to be super relatable, by the way. Inshallah, everyone's going to be able to appreciate this point. The Quraysh used to say, he's just a person like me. He's just a person like me. What gives him the right to tell us what to believe and what not to believe? What gives him the right to call himself a messenger? What gives him the right to tell me that this is right and this is wrong? What makes him unique? That's what the Quraysh had a problem with. Why? Because they saw Muhammad ibn Abdullah playing in the street when he was a kid. They saw Muhammad ibn Abdullah like going to the grocery store and buying vegetables and food for his family after a day of work. So they had a problem with a person who Allah chose to fulfill the responsibility of a prophet. They said, how can it be? And there are some scholars, by the way, who wrote modern day texts about this. It's fascinating. Psychologically, it's fascinating that they say that this type of behavior is so poisonous. It's so toxic because certain people, they say, well, if not me, then why him? I should have been that person. Why did I not get chosen? What's so bad about me that you overlooked me and you chose that person? And by the way, when you talk about imradul qalb, the concept in Islam about the diseases of the heart, one of the greatest symptoms of diseases of the heart, specifically when it comes to the idea of kibr, of arrogance, is that a person cannot stand when another is praised in front of them. So when they look around and they see somebody, saying, oh, mashallah, look at that brother, alhamdulillah, it seems like he landed that job and mashallah, deservedly so, like he worked so hard. And you're sitting there, you're like, well, I worked hard. Didn't hear you talk about me the other day, right? Or somebody says, oh, mashallah, that person's fit. Mashallah, alhamdulillah, right? And then you look at yourself and you're like all dripped out and no one noticed you. And you're like, why? Why does everyone notice everybody but me? This is one of the greatest symptoms of kibr, because you cannot even stand to be in the vicinity of a person who's being praised in front of you. And the Quraysh suffered from this very, very badly. When they used to see the Prophet ﷺ, almost like a sense of jealousy overcame them. Like, yeah, I raised that kid. I took care of him when he was young. I know his family. So why is he getting this treatment from God, right? And it teaches us something very profound. A couple of lessons for all of us, for those of us who are kind of like mentally jotting down notes. Number one, it teaches us this, that there are a lot of people who are better than us. It's a form of humility. Subhanallah. Whenever somebody else is praised in front of you, one of the characteristics of a Muslim is actually to look at that moment of praise and substitute the jealousy for emulation. Like if that person is being praised, I want to cleanse my heart and I actually want to think to myself sincerely, subhanallah, maybe that person has something that I should try to emulate. Like if a person is being praised for their generosity, instead of me being like, clearly you don't know them, instead of me being like that, I should actually be like, yeah, you know what? Like, mashallah, that person does have generous tendencies. Like, may Allah Ta'ala make me like that one day. You know? If a person is being praised for their gentleness and their softness within their heart, instead of you pulling up receipts of every time that they were mean, which is like where our headspace goes to, right? Like anytime someone's like, oh, mashallah, they're so nice. And all of a sudden, all you can do is bring up that burn book that you have in your own life. And you're like, wow, really? Nice? Like, look at all the things that I have about them. They're terrible people, actually. No. Go into your head, completely extinguish that thought, and be like, no. There's a reason why that person called them kind. Maybe I should appreciate the moment. Don't automatically go like hunting for every vice that that person has ever had, and appreciate the moment where that person was a person that you could emulate. So number one, there's a lot of people who are better than us. If we ever think to ourselves like, man, like I'm a little bit of everything, right? I'm generous, I'm kind. Or it's like that Michael Scott scene from The Office, right? I'm generous, I'm kind, right? I like giving people things like, instead of starting to kind of gas yourself up, start being like, no, there's a lot of people who are a lot better than me. And subhanAllah, I'll give you one tip that somebody taught me one time. SubhanAllah, if there's ever a moment where you're feeling praised, right? People are praising you, and you're kind of allowing that inkling of kibr to enter your own heart, immediately divert away from the praise and actually almost like talk down on yourself. It's a very, very healthy thing, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to do. So when a person's like, oh, mashallah, you got into that program? And inside of you, all these like bubbly feelings are kind of starting to like kind of come up. You're like, yeah, I'm actually really smart, and like I work super hard, and you have no idea how many papers I had to turn in for that. You know what you should say? Like, yeah, like subhanAllah, man, there's so many people that got in way before me. Like I was like the last. I was like, no, like it's nothing crazy. We'll pause for just a second, inshallah. So the second point that I made here is that whenever you feel that there's a moment where kibr enters your heart, the idea is always going to be to try and downplay yourself, even if it makes the nafs extremely uncomfortable. All right? And the last point that I would like to make here when it comes to this particular point, right, of why the Quraysh used to say, like, why him and not us, or what makes him special over us, the last point to take away is maybe people are actually a lot better than you think they are. Maybe we don't have enough husn al-dhan of people around us. Maybe we just think that everyone is worse than they actually are, right? The Quraysh, if you were to ask, subhanAllah, they would have a lot to say about the Prophet ﷺ in terms of his like trust and his amana, his trustworthiness and his truthfulness. But they used to always pick and prod at these small things that actually their own nafs used to be overcome by. So whenever we look around people, right, look around the community, look around your friends and your family, perhaps actually people are a lot better than you give them credit for. Okay, so keep that in mind. So this is the second problem that they had with the Prophet ﷺ, is that what was special about him? And subhanAllah, you actually read this beautiful, these narrations are so interesting. The Quraysh used to say things like, well, every other leader that we've ever seen, they're always surrounded by like, royalty and wealth and advisors and this and that and all that stuff. The people that surround Muhammad, the people that surround Muhammad are just people that are like poor. It's like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Zayd ibn Haritha and other people, Ali ibn Abi Talib. These people don't have money. So what's so special about him? What makes him a leader? So you see, there's this preconceived notion that if a person has to be successful, they have to look like that. The Quraysh thought the same way. If you're a leader, if you're high up, and if you're like socially accepted by the people around you, you have to fit into that box. You have to look like that. And now it's easy nowadays in 2026 to go and think like, oh man, that's like 1,500 years ago. So yeah, it's crazy that they thought like that. But man, we think the exact same way. We think the exact same way. We look at a person, how many people in here, don't answer this question out loud because this is like a shameful thing to admit, but think it in your own head. How many times have you sized up a person the minute that you glanced your eyes at them? You're like, okay, got it, downloaded, right? You didn't even say salam to them. You saw them, just the way that they looked, and you're like, yep, done. Know who they are. You didn't even give that person a chance. That person, you're like, yeah, never. No, not possible. You know, subhanAllah, something crazy? I remember I had this fond memory. There's this family friend that we have, okay, in our life, in my life and in my family's lives, that, mashallah, it's 2026 now, right? They used to drive a Toyota Avalon, okay? Up until like 4 years ago, like 2021, 2022. They used to drive a Toyota Avalon. By the way, they discontinued that car. It was so bad that they discontinued it, okay? Subhanallah, we found out after meeting them, like, and we didn't even know what this person did. This is the initial stages. We found out that he was actually a neurosurgeon. Just driving a Toyota Avalon every single day, had like 230,000 miles on that joint. It's a Toyota, go figure, right? Like, all y'all have like Honda Civics. So like, literally, drove a $230,000 mile just car for however so many years that we knew him. And then we had to like pry it out of his mouth. We're like, what do you do? He's like, I gotta go to the hospital, bro. Are you sick? He's like, no, I'm actually a neurosurgeon. I'm like, wait, what? So subhanAllah, even to us, we're like, wow, if you're successful, why do you drive that? If you're so loaded, why do you dress like that? These are the things that the human psychology just can't wrap its mind around. So when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, you're like, well, he doesn't look like a leader. The Quraysh used to say that. He doesn't surround himself by people who would surround themselves with a leader. So what gives him the right to be a leader? And subhanAllah, the right was that he was chosen by Allah. That's the greatest right of all time. If you're chosen by God, what kind of right would ever triumph over that? And that's why I tell people in a day and age where we're always trying to search for our identity, right? Identity is like the big hot button topic for Muslim America. Like, who am I? What am I, right? I tell people this all the time. Before you say anything, you better say you're a Muslim. That is the greatest identity you'll ever have the honor of claiming. Whether you're a Desi or Lahori or Karachi or Nahari, I don't care, dude. Like, that doesn't matter to me. Whether you eat Sindhi biryani or Kachi biryani, whether you speak Fusha or Ammi, like, I don't care. You are a Muslim, dude. We had a session with Mufti Asim Rashid from Miftah on Friday. The most thumbs up question we got that night? One person asked, and like 40 people liked it, like they want all of us to answer it up on the stage. They're like, what do you do if you want to marry outside your culture and your family's making it impossible? And I'm like, subhanallah, man. And by the way, like I'm a nice guy, so I'm not gonna be rude on stage. So I'm like, yeah, sometimes I get it, I understand it. Sometimes it's difficult for families to acclimatize to people who speak a different language than them. Food is different, culture is different, dress is different. Even the way that you talk to somebody is different. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, dude, in 2 generations, like Urdu is going to be like, like those TikTok videos that make fun of how bad your Urdu is? It's going to be that by like generation 2. Like, that's what it's going to be like. Focus more on if your kids are praying. For real. Focus more on if your kids are praying. Focus more if your kids know Fatiha and Surah Al-Nas and Falaq and Ikhlas. Like, focus on that. You should be more worried about that versus wearing whatever dress that they wear for Eid. Like, that's not our concern, man. So that's what unites everyone together, okay? And then the last thing, subhanAllah, that the Quraysh had a lot of trouble wrapping their minds around about the Prophet ﷺ is this idea that the Prophet was calling towards one God to worship. And I'll tell you why that sounds interesting. Because you're like, okay, obviously, like that's like the tenet of Islam. That's the biggest tenet ever. But it wasn't exactly that, because their reason for it was more alarming. Why did they have a problem with worshiping one God over idols? It wasn't because logically they believed in multiple gods. Because right now, if you brought in, I'll tell you this right now, if you brought in a person who doesn't believe in anything, like an agnostic, a person who doesn't believe in any religion, and you bring them in front of me, guarantee you logically after 1 hour, they would probably believe in one God over multiple. Logically, okay? So clearly logic wasn't the thing. And the Quraysh were not dumb people. They're smart. They actually knew things, okay? So what was their reason? Their reason was, our people before us, they used to do it. So we're going to do what everyone else just did. So subhanAllah, when you break down a lot of the pushback that the Prophet ﷺ received from his community, it was less about theology and more about social life. People just didn't want to own up to their actions. People had a lot of arrogance, and people just got used to what they were doing and didn't want to be told otherwise. So if I were to talk to y'all and myself before anybody else, one of the greatest things to keep in our own hearts is to understand, man, subhanAllah, I can never ever get caught up in the trap of shaitan that says, just because I do it means that it's the best thing to do. I gotta be able to look around to people around me and be like, you know what? Maybe they know better than me. Maybe there's stuff that I fall short in that person will exceed in, and I can learn from their example. That's what the Quraysh needed at that time. So because of all of these vices and all of these issues, what came about is persecution. Because I'll tell you this, subhanAllah, when a person can't like reason properly, they almost always resort to just like physical violence or verbal violence, right? That's why like bullies, right? Y'all know this. Like bullies, people who like abuse people verbally, like because they can't rationally logic anything anymore, what do? They just resort to some sort of abuse and assault. Because that's the only way that I can get my way. Because you've clearly, like, it makes more sense what you're doing, and I know what I'm doing is not right, but just to make myself feel better, I'm just going to shut you up because of the power that I have over you. That's it. And so they began to persecute people. I'm going to name a couple of people, inshallah, that some of you guys may know, but some of you guys may not know. Number one, obviously, we understand this person's name because he's legendary, Bilal ibn Rabah. Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu an was a slave of a person by the name of Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Bilal radiallahu an, because of his own love towards what the Prophet ﷺ was sharing, Umayyah bin Khalaf did a couple of things. I'm going to ask you guys to be a little patient and a little bit mature because this is a little bit difficult to understand. Bilal ibn Rabah's owner, Umayyah bin Khalaf, what he used to do is that he would hand him over to like the gangs of Mecca. Like he would literally hand him over to the gangs of Mecca, like the people that would cause trouble in Mecca. And what they would do is that they would tie a rope around the neck of Bilal radiallahu an and tie the other part of it to the leg of their animal, and they used to tell their animal to go run. That's what they used to do to Bilal ibn Rabah. And then we obviously know the very famous story of Umayyah bin Khalaf literally placing a boulder upon the torso of Bilal radiallahu anh. And what a lot of people don't think about is this. They always think about the heaviness of the boulder, but you actually don't think about what the back of Bilal radiallahu anh was laying on. The back of Bilal radiallahu anh was laying on the hot, baking sun of Meccan desert. So I want you guys to think, subhanAllah, and I'm so sorry to bring this up, but I'm just doing this so we understand the gravity of the situation. You know when you put something on the stove and you flatten it, and it's burning from both sides because of the pressure? Just think about that. And even amongst all of this, Bilal radiallahu anhu, what do you say? Ahadun, 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 ahad. There's only one, there's only one, there's only one, there's only one. And finally, this torture ended with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq just happening to walk by. He saw this and he said, please, I will pay you whatever you want, just give him to us. And they would look at him, they're like, you want him? Again, look at the disease. Look at the disease of the Quraysh. You want him? Are you sure? Your money for him? You see, this is what people of the dunya can't comprehend about the people of the akhirah. The people of the dunya, they only see like exchange rates. They only see like prices. So they see a Gucci bag and they're like, yeah, like $400. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. But if they ever look at like a bag from like, I don't know, TJ Maxx, it's like $20, they're like, ugh. But for a person of the akhirah, they're like, yeah, alhamdulillah, looks kind of cute, right? Serves the function. I'm going to buy it. A person of the dunya is like, yeah, but what will people say? Right? It doesn't have that designer thing on it. Like, that's what people of the dunya worry about. So Umayyah bin Khalaf goes, you want to pay your money for Bilal? It's like paying to the Quraysh, it was like paying like $500 for something you buy from Walmart. Like, why would you waste your money on that? And subhanAllah, I'll tell you what. There was a narration of the Prophet ﷺ that mentions that when the Prophet ﷺ was in his famous journey called Isra wal Mi'raj, when Allah Ta'ala took him, literally it says that Allah subhanahu he took the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to the heavens. Okay? When the Prophet ﷺ was touring the heavens with Jibreel alayhi salam himself, like the angel Jibreel, the Prophet ﷺ said that he heard footsteps in the heavens. I want you guys to think about something. He heard footsteps in the heavens. And the Prophet ﷺ, he turns to Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, Ya Jibreel, ma hadha? What is it that I'm hearing? And Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, whenever Bilal radiallahu anhu walks in the dunya, we hear the footsteps of his feet. We hear the echoes of his feet reminiscing in the akhirah. We hear the footsteps echoing in the heavens. A person that everybody on earth wrote off. We, the angels, we hear his footsteps in the heavens. You guys barely hear his footsteps in the dunya, but we hear it in the heavens. That's Bilal radiallahu anhu. Another person to mention, which is beautiful, is a person by the name of Khabbab ibn al-Arat. If you guys don't know Khabbab ibn al-Arat, Khabbab ibn al-Arat was actually the Quran teacher of Umar ibn Khattab's sister. And Khabbab ibn al-Arat, subhanAllah, he said he was a blacksmith. And whenever Khabbab mentioned his shahada and proclaimed it publicly, Ammar, there's a woman named Ammar who was very staunch advocate. She was an adversary of Islam at that time. What she used to do is she used to take the tools that Khabbab used to make, and she used to brand him with them. Like she used to put them on fire and melt them and put it on Khabbab's skin. So there were narrations that Khabbab had all of these welts and brand marks all over his body, because that's what they used to do. Okay? There are famous stories, subhanAllah, the last one that I'll mention here, and everyone should know this, is Sumayya bin Khayyat. Sumayya bin Khayyat was the woman who was killed as her owner, as one of her, as a person, one of her owners, Abu Hudhayfa al-Makhzumi. He literally took a spear, a'udhu billah, may Allah protect us, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of triggering anybody here, but this is important for us to kind of just acknowledge that this is how terrible human beings can be if they lose Allah far enough. Abu Hudhayfa Makhzumi, he literally took a spear and he literally stabbed her in her private area, and she passed away on the spot. I just want you to think about that. I just want you to think about that. And it was so bad. It was so bad that her son Ammar was so afraid after seeing his mother having been done that level of abuse in front of his own eyes. Ammar, he said, forget it. He goes, forget it. I'll renounce Islam and I'll follow whatever you want me to follow. So finally they're like, all right, good. Finally we got one person. And Ammar, he felt so bad that he ran to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, Ya Rasulullah, I became a kafir. I became a disbeliever. I can't believe I betrayed you and Allah, Ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam calms him down. He sits him down. He says, Ammar, sit with me. And he recites to Ammar bin Yasir, he says, Man kafara billahi min ba'di imanihi illa man ukfir, he says, illa man ukriha wa qabluhu mutma'innun. He says that those who renounce faith in Allah and open their hearts to disbelief, except for those walakin man sharaha bil kufri saduran fa'alaytihim ghadabun min Allahi wa lahum adhabun azim. Except for those who are forced to do it. So Ammar, you are forced. We don't believe that that's really who you are. You are forced to do that. So if it's done out of fear and you don't feel that way, you're okay. Because Islam is not unreasonable. Islam is a reasonable deen. If you're that level of afraid, don't think that the minute that you feel afraid and you say something out of fear, that's who you are, the end all be all. No, Ammar, that's not who you are, and the Prophet ﷺ consoled him. Now, a couple of things I want you to I want to share before we wrap up, inshallah, for the day, is something very powerful. If you think about this, subhanAllah, none of these people, by the way, tortured the Prophet ﷺ. What do they torture? Who'd you hear names of? The Sahaba, everyone who were friends with him, right? So what you see, by the way, from true evil is what? True evil, they will not necessarily torture the one that they dislike, but they will start to pick and prod at the people that the one that they dislike loves. You understand that? So, subhanAllah, I'm sure you guys have seen in the news for the past few months, the jahil of our time has been this dude from Michigan who's going around to different states and burning the Quran and pulling up weird things like a pig's head and throwing it out to Muslim community. It's just weird. He came to East Plano a few weeks ago, a weird shaitani dude. But you see, he's doing weird things. He's not actually doing anything directly. He's just trying to rage bait Muslims. That's literally what he's trying to do. He's trying to rage bait and make Muslims angry. Because he knows that he can't actually harm Muslims, but what he can do is he can harm the things that Muslims feel passionately about. You see what I'm saying? So the Quraysh did the same thing. Same thing. Quraysh were like, we're not going to touch the Prophet ﷺ. We're not going to touch Muhammad ibn Abdullah. But who we are going to mess with is Bilal. We're going to mess with Ammar. We're going to mess with Yasir. We're going to mess with Sumayya. Right? These are the people that we're going to mess with. This is the nature of true evil. True evil will always be like that. And then number two, something very, very powerful is this. Throughout all of this, and I'm going to share something really incredible with you guys. Throughout all of this, the Muslims, what was their agenda? Their agenda was anybody who loves Allah and His Messenger, they're going to get so scared by our tactics that they're going to leave. They're going to start renouncing faith. But what happened was actually the opposite. More people became Muslim. More people started to become Muslim. They said, La ilaha illallah. Because why? Check this out. If you are on one side of the spectrum here, which side would you want to be on? The side of a person who thinks it's okay to torture a mother and a father in front of their child, or the side of a person who says there's only one God? Even if you don't believe in that right away. Just merely because of how barbaric the other side is, I'm just going to go to the other side, man. Because y'all crazy over there. Does that make sense? So the other Quraysh who are watching all these things happening, they're like, man, I don't really know what religion I am, but whatever side they're on, I don't really want to be with them. Because what they're doing is kind of crazy. You see, and this is where Islam began to flourish. The Prophet ﷺ began to take in more people. There were more Muslims coming in because they saw true evil, which teaches you the nature of evil. Evil will never prevail. So when you see all the stuff around you, you see the wrongdoing of people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, whatever they are, and they're spreading gossip and lies, and they're doing things that are inhumane and torturous and all these different things, don't worry. True nature will always come out. Truth will always prevail. Good will always triumph over evil. Never allow yourself to believe otherwise. Allah Ta'ala, He says in the Quran, وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. We will never allow the reward of people who are good to ever be lost. So you never, as a Muslim, you can never believe that evil will ever triumph over good. And this is where we are at the time of the Prophet ﷺ at this point. More and more Muslims begin to accept Islam. And at this point, subhanAllah, the heart of Muslims began to kind of come together during times of trial. How many people in here have had great friends of theirs being made during times of difficulty? Like when you were all in the trenches, things were not going well, you were kind of like getting hunted by other people around you. You found that one dude to pray dhuhr with and you're like, dang, are you like my Abu Bakr? Like you turn around, you're like, wow, no way, right? You turn over to Sumayya and you're like, Sumayya? You like, subhanAllah, that's how Allah brings the hearts of people together sometimes. Don't just think that you have to find your best friend in the middle of like this flowery meadow drinking matcha, right? Like that's not the way friendships are made all the time, right? Now I know sometimes it is, but that's not always the way that friendships are made. Sometimes friendships are made because both of y'all are going through something difficult at the same time and both of y'all turn to Allah at the same time. And that's why people say faith is thicker than blood. I'm sure there are moments in here where people who are, subhanAllah, they're seeking that companionship and that community. They may not even find it within the walls of their own home, or they will find it somewhere else. Because those who pray together stay together. Those who love Allah will always be connected by Allah. And this is what happened with the Prophet ﷺ. And quality will always triumph over quantity. I always, subhanAllah, was taught this by my teachers, that if any of us were ever to kind of go into the community of the Prophet ﷺ at this time and go into one of the homes that they used to pray in, you would think it's the craziest thing of all time. Maybe 20, 30 people praying, and that's it. Everyone's like, wow, seriously, man? Like, that sucks. Like, where's like the Instagram reel on that? Where's like the pictures on that thing? Like, where's like the beautiful, like, no. The Prophet ﷺ, he rolled with a few people. But you know, subhanAllah, what's so powerful? The few people that he rolled with were named Khadija radiallahu anha, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Zayd ibn Haritha, Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? These are the people that he used to roll with. So quality will always triumph over quantity. And alhamdulillah, at the very, very end, the last thing we'll cover inshallah today before we pause is that the last tactic by people who are truly evil is when none of their other strategies work, they will always resort to some sort of like, hey, let's like meet halfway. Let's meet halfway. Like you do this one day and we do this the other day. And so I'll finish with this narration. The narration mentions that the Quraysh finally, after all of this didn't work, more Muslims started to come around, okay? The Quraysh finally said, okay, we got to figure something out. We can't mess with him. We even, a'udhu billah, killed some of his companions. But even then, he's not stopping. So what do we do here? Let's check this out. Let's go to his uncle Abu Talib and be like, yo, you need to tell your nephew to relax because like he's causing people to die. Man, subhanAllah, is giving major human shield vibes. You know what I'm talking about? Like the gaslighting of the oppression is nuts, right? People in where should not be named, right? So like, yeah, actually it's their own people that are causing the death of their own community, right? They're using them as human shields. That's what they say. The Quraysh, they go to Abu Talib and they say, man, your nephew's responsible for the death of all his companions. Even though they're the ones that are torturing them. They're the ones that are killing them. So you see the idea of dhulm, man, it's very standard across all generations. Gaslighting. You know, backwards nature of morality. So they go to Abu Talib and they say, man, like, can you please like reason with your nephew? We don't want to see this happening anymore. You think we like, you know, abusing our own people, our own community? And so what they tell Abu Talib is this. They say, go to your nephew and tell him that fine. He can talk about God and one God and him being a prophet and all that stuff. But tell him that he has to meet us halfway. Like, we'll worship your God one day. and y'all meet us halfway and worship our God the next. Doesn't that sound like a great deal? We can all sing Kumbaya and just kind of like, go to the Christmas party together, inshallah, right? Like, we'll be cool. And Abu Talib's like, okay, like, let's think about this, right? He goes to the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to his nephew and he says, Ya Muhammad, Ya Ghulam, Ya Habib, think about what they're asking. It'll put an end to all of this. Can you just say that, like, you'll worship like Lat and Uzza, the idols, one day, and then they'll come to like Jummah next Friday? It's all good. It's all good. We're cool. Everything's going to work out. And the Prophet ﷺ then said the most famous line in this portion of the seerah. He said, it doesn't matter if you put the sun in one hand and the moon in the other hand, I would not stop believing and preaching in the truth of La ilaha illallah. I don't care what you're going to give me. And they offered him a lot more, by the way. They offered him power, they offered him status, they offered him desire, lust, whatever you name it. They offered it to him. And the Prophet said, if you put the sun and the moon in my hands, I would not stop preaching what I'm preaching and calling to people what I'm calling to people and believing in what I believe in. What does that tell you? It tells you that Iman is unshakable. It cannot be shaken. It's not something we compromise, right? And by the way, I'm not trying to kind of like light a fire under people and be like, yeah, everything's haram, everyone's haram, even my colleagues are haram. Like, no. Put the haram thing down a little bit. What I'm talking about more so is you actually sacrificing your own morality. Don't go around judging the affairs of other people. Talk about what you're doing. The number one vice of 2026 Muslim America is we hear one lecture and then we decide to go make a TikTok video and criminalizing everybody around us. Really, actually, the Imam said that you going to a Christmas party is haram. And then we start creating all this animosity within the ummah. What you actually should do is focus on yourself. Focus on yourself, okay? Focus on yourself. Think about, are there moments in which I may actually sacrifice my own morality, right? Don't worry about the people around you right now. That's not your position. That's not your place. Remember what I said last week about the Prophet ﷺ is, before Allah ever gave him clearance to even teach his own family and friends, Allah said, perfect the character within you first. Because guess what? None of those people are going to listen to you if you don't practice what you preach. No one's going to care about your values and your morals if you don't actually show those morals and values in your own life. So put down the megaphone, put down the microphone, put down the TikTok video, put down that stupid rodeo mic that you have, and just be like, you know what? I'm going to start to, inshallah, practice this a little bit more myself. I'm going to be a little bit more merciful towards my mother. I'm going to be a little bit more kind towards my father. Nowadays, we think to ourselves, like, anytime our parents mention anything that's a little bit like culturally Desi or Arab, we're like, you uneducated fool. You don't even know hadith. I'm like, that's your mom you're talking to, dude. Like, are you kidding me? That's your mother that you're talking to. So what, dude? So what if she's like listening to Bollywood music once in a while? Take it easy on her. You go pray and ask your mom, hey mom, do you want to pray together? The problem is, before we ask people to pray with us, we shame them for their sins. Before we ask a person to break bread with us, we shame them for their vices that they have. And then we ask ourselves, why doesn't anybody understand true Islam? Like, this is the problem with our community, right? So, priorities in a row, inshallah, right? And so, the Quraysh used to start, now they see, the Prophet is unshakable. He cannot be bought out. He cannot be sold. And this is what made him who he was, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And so, inshallah, we're going to pause right there for the day, inshallah ta'ala, and we will pick back up next Tuesday, bi'idhnillah. And next Tuesday, inshallah, I'm going to actually make a little bit of a shift in the session, in the series, where we're going to, inshallah, fast forward a little bit to a beautiful, beautiful moment in which the Prophet ﷺ, and by the way, if anybody in here has ever felt kind of guilty in their life about, like, you know, my actions may be kind of affecting other people around me, like the Prophet ﷺ, because of La ilaha illallah, there were people that were being tortured. I want you to know that the Prophet ﷺ was extremely concerned of his community around him. So inshallah, next Tuesday, we're going to start talking about exactly what the Prophet ﷺ did in response to a lot of the abuse of the people of the Quraysh, inshallah. So we'll talk about that, inshallah, next week. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Inshallah, we'll see you all next Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum. If I could